Between Kalimantan and Sulawesi, there is an imaginary line, an invisible line, with invisible lines that stretches between the two neighboring continents. Animal kingdom in Asia and Australia, very different. For the most part, wildlife never crossed this imaginary line. Even birds. And that's how it happened. For tens of millions of years, these lines shaped the evolution of animals in a different way. On each side of it, it all started about 30 million years ago. When plate tectonics, Australia hits the Eurasian tectonic plate and created the archipelago, changing the direction of ocean currents and creating new regional climate. On one side, map in Indonesia and Malaysia monkey, apes, elephants, tigers and rhinoceros evolved, while on the other, in Papua and Australia marsupials, monotreme, rodents, and cockatoos breed. Very few species are abundant on both sides. This strange separation of fauna, called the Wallace Line, taken from the naturalist's name, Alfred Russel Wallace, who first realized a stark difference in animal life while exploring the region in the mid-century 19th. We can take it as a sure thing that the Strait of Lombok between Bali and Lombok, which is only 15 miles across, 24 kilometers, marking the boundary, and suddenly separating the two regions. Big zoology in the world? Right whales. The naturalists then developed the theory of evolution independently, around the same time as Charles Darwin. Line he drew in more than a century ago that still considered a hindrance to the evolutionary hypothesis, although the debate continues about location and the exact mechanism. Carly Casella, many list the life science. In general, Wallace's line separates the Asian continental shelf from the Australian tectonic plate. This is not just a geological line, but also the line, climate and biological, deep-sea channel, like the Strait of Lombok, separate each display, which makes it difficult for animals to cross, even when the sea level in the past is much lower than it currently is. This channel remains, even though the line, invisible eyes Wallace most clearly seen, when comparing mammals in Asia and Australia. This line also occurs in birds, reptiles and other animals. Even winged creatures usually did not travel across the swallow line. Some types of fish and microbes, showing genetic differences on one side of the border compared to the other side, which shows very little intermingling between populations. Scientists have yet to discover an invisible barrier. What's holding this species back? But habitat and climate may be a factor that accentuates the gap. The evolution. In 2023, analysis of more than 20,000 vertebrate species found that Southeast Asian lineages evolved in an ancient environment, which is relatively tropical. This allows them to spread towards Papua in the humid islands as a stepping stone. In the meantime, wildlife on the Australian continental shelf evolved in much drier conditions that define different evolutionary paths. This means that the Australian wildlife are at a disadvantage on tropical islands, which is closer with line equator, but more and more researchers are studying the Wallet line. The more unclear where the line should be drawn and how porous the barrier is, at least for some animals that can swim, float or fly, like a bat, lizard beetle, or apes. According to scientists, Wallace boundary is not an absolute limit, rather it's more of a gradient. So, a blurred line. It helps us understand the evolution of animals for thousands of species. Mental and actual map of Darwin and Wallace is the table where the evolutionary schemes play out, which is comparable to the geological time scale, says science historian Jane Camerini in 1993. Untuck History of Science Society. What starts as one single line, which was roughly placed that was withdrawn over a century ago, has now helped shape the bigger picture and more complicated about the world, nature and its mysteries.